Hello everyone, and welcome to another Cut Rate Commander Precon Upgrade Guide, the series where we take a look at Precon decks and bring them up to cut rate standards. My name is Grazzet, and today we'll be looking at the Call for Backup Precon from March of the Machine and its face commander, Bright Palm Soul Awakener, which we'll be bringing up from its roughly $40 price point to an increased budget of $75 after upgrades. But before we continue, just a quick reminder that, at the time of uploading this, the channel's 10k subscriber giveaway is still going and has been extended to April 29th, in which one lucky winner will have the opportunity to win a $100 Urtet Remnant of Memnarch deck built by yours truly, as well as a plethora of accessories and upgrades for it. So if you're interested in signing up for your chance to win, be sure to check out the link above or in the description for the full build and how to enter. Additionally, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you like this content and would like me to continue making more videos like this in the future. And if you're feeling particularly generous, please consider buying me a coffee at the link in the description to keep me caffeinated as I work on more of these builds. Also, be sure to stick around until the end of the video to see which Precon upgrade we'll be covering next. So, with that out of the way, let's start by taking a look at the commander and playstyle. Bright Palm Soul Awakener is a 4/3 Fox Shaman with backup 1 that costs 1 and Naya and has the following ability. Whenever this creature attacks, double the number of +1/+1 counters on target creature and prevent that creature from being blocked by creatures of 2 power or less until the end of the turn. Breaking down her core stats, Bright Palm possesses a mid-weight CMC, a slightly below average stat block for her cost that can be improved by her built-in backup 1, and an ability that allows her to exponentially grow our creatures' +1/+1 counters and make them evasive as she swings in, enabling them to hit harder and connect with our opponent's life totals more reliably. Taking a closer look at this ability, it primarily serves as a repeatable +1/+1 counter doubler from our command zone, making it a fantastic payoff for any +1/+1 counter focused build. That said, it is tied to our commander attacking in order for us to use it, meaning we would normally need to find a way to grant Bright Palm haste in order to get immediate value from it. However, thanks to backup, we can temporarily grant this ability to a creature already in play without summoning sickness to proc it immediately without having to go through additional hoops, and then continue proccing it with our commander after they're able to attack. This, coupled with the target being able to bypass chump blockers, will ensure our counter-latent creatures will, at worst, force our opponents to intercept our powered-up creatures with non-expendable bodies, and, at best, allowing our creatures to 1 to 2 shot our opponents depending on how many counters they had before we doubled them. So, considering her ability, Bright Palm is obviously a +1/+1 counter-focused commander, and, to its credit, the Precon does a solid job at reflecting that, providing us with plenty of sources of +1/+1 counter generation and synergies right out of the box for us to take advantage of. That said, we still have plenty of room to make improvements, ranging from adding additional sources of counter generation and/or distribution to ensure Bright Palm's counter doubling has as much impact as possible, refining the build's counter synergies to provide us with additional utility and value, and making some quality of life changes to the build to improve our core stats, with a particular focus on bolstering the core build's rather lackluster 3 sources of card advantage so that we won't easily run out of resources. So let's make our way back to Kamigawa, where the Plains defenders are holding back the endless Phyrexian onslaught. From the flying city of Otawara, where the Moonfolk and their technological constructs dogfight against winged Phyrexian horrors, to the Jukai forest, where the Kami spirits unleash their arcane magics against Elish Norns' most horrific abominations, the Phyrexians have turned the entire plane into one unending battlefield, and it is on that battlefield that we find Bright Palm, using her ancient Kitsune magics to awaken the innate power of her world's defenders, unleashing their potential to become the mighty protectors and heroes that Kamigawa needs them to be. And though they face overwhelming odds, they will stand and fight against Elish Norns' incursion until they draw their last breath. So, now that we have a better understanding of the commander and playstyle, let's take a look at the cards we'll be keeping from the base build. Starting off with the creatures we'll be keeping from the base build, we'll of course be retaining our most efficient counter-generating and distributing creatures to ensure our commander's counter-doubling has the most impact as possible every time we use it. On the counter generation side, we'll be holding on to Genesis Hydra and Machias the Lunarch, whose scalable counter generation based on the mana we pump into them makes them ideal targets for our commander to double up on without too much setup, while their upsides of either getting us a free permanent spell or getting more counters on our creatures fitting perfectly with our creature and counter heavy game plan. Champion of Lamholt, who passively grows as we summon our creatures, which is again great in this creature heavy build, and grants AoE evasion on top of that to guarantee that both it and our other creatures can get in reliably for damage. Mana Gorger Hydra and Forgotten Ancient, both of which serve as ever-growing threats that will load themselves up with counters turn after turn without us having to do anything, with the former's built-in trample allowing it to reliably crack in for damage, and the latter's counter distribution allowing us to get our counters on the creatures that need them most. Krinko Tin Street Kingpin, who passively loads himself up with counters as he swings in and also floods the board with tokens based on his size as he does so, making him a superb target for our commander and other counter distribution effects to make him even bigger and therefore generate even more board presence. And finally, Colonian Hydra, which is a superb reprint that not only comes in with a sizable number of counters on itself, but also doubles all our creatures' counters every time it swings in to help grow our counters even faster alongside our commander. Then on the counter distribution side of things, we'll be keeping both Good Fortune Unicorn and Juniper Order Ranger, each of which get us additional counters on our creatures as they come into play to get the counter game plan started or supplement it, with the latter also growing itself as an added bonus, as well as Conclave Mentor, which doesn't add counters to our creatures by itself, but does improve all our other counter generation and distribution effects, making it well worth running to further empower our game plan. In a similar vein, we'll also be retaining the new backup entries Guardian Scale Lord, Conclave Sledge Captain, and Emergent Woodworm, which again help distribute additional +1/+1 counters to our creatures as they come down, while also providing Graveyard Recursion, extra counter generation, or free permanent spells temporarily to said creatures as additional utility, which they can later continue to use themselves to generate even more value. From there, we'll be moving on to our kept +1/+1 counter support creatures, in which we'll be hanging on to Abzan Falconeer and Pride Malkin, both of which enable our counter-laden creatures to bypass blockers by granting them flying or trample respectively to inflict maximum damage with their increased bulk, Armorcraft Judge, which uses our modified creatures to generate card advantage as it ETBs, generally reloading our hands completely as it does so considering the build, as well as the Legends Rishkar Pima Renegade, who turns all our +1/+1 counter-laden creatures into mana dorks to speed up our mana base considerably and help get to our higher CMC spells faster, and Hamaz, Guardian of Arashin, who benefits from our +1/+1 counter-loaded creatures by first reducing his cost and later reducing the cost of all our other creatures, resulting in a substantial cost reduction for our most common card type. It's then on to creatures that made the cut by benefiting directly from our +1/+1 counter distribution in ways outside of improving their stat blocks, with Gyre Sage, Incubation Druid, and Fertilid all staying on as superb sources of ramp that get even better as we get counters on them by either tapping for more mana or getting more uses out of their land ramp respectively. Mindless Automaton staying in as well as a manaless source of card advantage that can easily draw us 2+ cards a turn if we continue to load it up with counters via our commander and other sources, and Constable of the Realm retaining its spot as a repeatable O-ring style effect that we can get continual uses out of so long as we keep getting counters on it, making it a superb way to continually disrupt our opponent's boards. And finally, as our last holdover creature from the base build, we have the legend Shalai and Halar, who are an excellent +1/+1 counter payoff in the form of burn that, when our commander starts doubling up large amounts of counters, can easily deal upwards of 10, 20, and possibly even larger amounts of damage, reducing our opponent's life totals to cinders by us simply committing to our playstyle, while also serving as a decent evasive body that we can grow with counters and crack in for damage as well. Then moving on to our instant carryovers, we'll be primarily focused on keeping the best sources of removal included in the base build to help pad our core stats, with Swords to Plowshares, Return to Nature, and Generous Gift all making the cut as excellent generic removal options in our colors that can deal with a wide variety of common threats, and Dramoka's Command and Inscription of Abundance staying in as well as more on-theme removal options that are both able to deal with our opponent's threats while simultaneously providing us with additional +1/+1 counter distribution to help with the primary game plan. Then closing out our instant carryovers, we have our only kept non-removal instant, Inspiring Call, which instead provides solid AoE protection against removal and wipes, which is appreciated considering it does take a bit of time to build up our creatures, as well as providing us with substantial card advantage on established board states, making it a superb entry that both protects the resources we have on board and gives us additional resources from our deck. It's then on to our sorcery holdovers, which only see the ramp spells Cultivate and Kodama's Reach retain their spots, both of which provide the build with fantastic no-nonsense land ramp to speed up and fix our mana base, so of course we'll be holding on to them. And then possessing an even smaller number of kept entries, our held over enchantments only have Civil Unrest making the cut, which is a powerful source of counters or haste for our creatures as they enter play, as well as an easy to enable damage doubler for them, which makes it well worth hanging on to. From there, it's on to our held over artifact entries, in which of course Soul Ring and Arcane Signet will be staying in as excellent sources of ramp that will help us speed up and or fix our mana base, and Strionic Resonator keeping its spot as well as a means to double up on our commander's ETB and on attack triggers to get even more usage out of them, or alternatively, get extra value out of any of our other triggered effects instead, of which this build has plenty. And finally, reaching our held over land base, we'll start off with our retained mana lands, in which we'll be hanging on to Command Tower, Jungle Shrine, and Path of Ancestry thanks to them tapping for all our colors, Exotic Orchard, which can generally tap for a couple of our colors off our opponent's lands, Canopy Vista and Cinderglade, as they are dual lands we can easily fetch up thanks to their basic land types for additional fixing, Fortified Village, Fury Calm Snarl, and Game Trail, which serve as additional dual lands that we can generally get into play untapped, Mossfire Valley and Sungrass Prairie, both of which are decent filter lands to help fix our colors, Temple of Abandon, Temple of Plenty, and Temple of Triumph, which again tap for 2 out of our 3 colors and, while slow, make up for it with their ETB card selection to help smooth out our draws, Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse, which provide us with some additional fixing to improve our mana base's consistency, and Corrosive Verge, which provides solid land-based ramp and can be used to fetch up non-basics as well to fix our mana base even further. Then moving on to our kept utility lands, we'll be holding on to Llanowar Reborn and Gavany Township, both of which get counters on our creatures to get our counter generation game plan going or build on it further, along with Kessig Wolfrun and Rogue's Passage, each of which provide our counter-laden creatures with the means to overcome blockers by either letting them crash through them or avoiding them entirely from the convenience of our land slot. And finally, we'll be keeping the 5 plains, 2 mountains, and 6 forests from the base build as our basics to round out our mana base. That leaves us with a final tally of 71 cards, including basic lands we'll be keeping from the base build, leaving us with 29 cards to replace. So, now that we've covered all the cards that made the cut from the core build, let's move on to our upgrades. Beginning with our creature upgrades, we'll start off by swapping out some of the more awkward to use creatures included in the base build to support our commander, with additional X creatures that better fit with our +1/+1 counter focused playstyle. As such, we'll be cutting Flame Rush Rider and Mirror Style Master, which are decent at creating copies of our commander, but are mana hungry and only proc her backup as the copy ETBs while not synergizing well with the rest of our counter-dependent creatures, and Restoration Angel, whose one-time blink isn't worth running in this build, though it can see play in a build more focused on specifically proccing backup, and replacing them with the Tyranids, Aberrant, Turvagon, and Exocrine, which are all scalable sources of +1/+1 counters, cantrip if we pump enough mana into them thanks to Ravenous, and provide excellent utility in the form of on-damage back row destruction, on-damage token creation, and a scalable board wipe. That said, despite these being solid additions in my opinion, I am well aware that some folks would rather not run Universes Beyond cards, so if you fall into that camp, I'll be providing some alternatives in the side grade section of the breakdown, or you can simply keep in the cards they replaced, as they are still decent ways of enabling our commander to get extra uses out of her. Then we'll also be axing Deathgreeter's Champion, who's a decent double striker which we can use to repeatedly grant a double strike to our creatures thanks to its combination of dash and backup, but paying 4 mana pop to do so being a bit too much in my opinion, and replacing it with Steelbane Hydra, which is yet another scalable +1/+1 counter creature that can also weaponize its counters by providing us with repeatable back row removal, which is exactly the type of creature we want to load up with counters to both crash in for damage and provide utility. Then from there, we'll be switching gears from creatures who come in with counters to creatures who distribute counters to others, in which we'll be replacing Alharu Solemn Ritualist and their lackluster counter distribution and death-dependent token creation with Helena and Elena Partners, who provide continual counter distribution that scales as they grow, on top of granting their target haste to ensure our counter-laden creatures can swing in as soon as they come down, benching Slogger Call Ingesting and its on-death counter distribution for Loyal Guardian, whose AoE counter distribution is much easier to proc so long as we control our commander, and its built-in trample making it a better target to grow with our counters, exchanging out Abzan Battle Priest's AoE life gain, which is admittedly useful to stabilize our life totals, for Bloodspore Thrinax, who provides an insane amount of counter distribution as our creatures enter play as we load him up with more and more counters, substituting Enduring Scale Lord and its overpriced self-counter generation with Sporeback Troll, whose graft allows us to spread its counters to other creatures as they come in, which in turn allows it to use its regeneration to protect both them and itself from removal, and trading Triskelion, which is admittedly powerful and can generate a lot of damage in this build under the right circumstances, but will find a better home in a combo deck that can win outright as soon as it comes down, for Defiler of Vigor, which provides us with ramp for our primarily green deck, continual easy to proc AoE counter distribution that takes advantage of our creature heavy build, and an overstated trampling body that becomes only more dangerous as it and other sources loaded up with counters. Then with our counter generating and distributing additions mostly covered, we'll be switching to making some quality of life changes to our creature base to help refine our build's core stats. Starting off with the changes to our ramp package, we'll be swapping out the decent but expensive Sunscorch Regent for the Mana Dork Kami of Whispered Hopes, which not only provides us with ramp that scales as it grows, but also empowers our counter distribution as well, and cutting the generically good Wood Elves for the more on-theme ramp source Pure Strain Genestealer, which we can easily get multiple uses out of in this build thanks to our focus on counters, but is by no means a necessary change if again you're adverse to using Universes Beyond cards. Then moving on to our draw package upgrades, which as mentioned previously is in dire need of an overhaul, we'll be cutting Elite Scale Guard, Falcon Wrath Exterminator, and Brawn, which are all decent enough sources of tap down removal and AoE trample, but not worth running at the cost of hamstringing our deck's draw potential, and adding in Lenore Autumn Sovereign, Kami of Celebration, and Beast Whisperer in their place, quite literally doubling the build's card advantage capability with their inclusion to help improve consistency, with the first two also contributing to our counter-centric game plan thanks to their counter distribution, while the latter takes advantage of our large creature base to provide us with a steady supply of cards instead. And lastly, as our final creature upgrade, we'll be replacing the +1/+1 counter payoff High Sentinels of Arashin with the even better counter payoff Aki Battle Squad, which enables all our +1/+1 counter modified creatures to swing in an additional time per turn, which not only allows them to crash their empowered stat blocks into our opponents more often, but also gets us extra uses out of our on-attack and on-damage triggers, which includes our commander, all our backup creatures, and a number of other powerful entries in the build to generate us even more value. It's our instant upgrades then up next, in which we'll only be making two changes, the first being swapping out Semester's End, which is an okay source of protection, but whose drawback of reducing the creatures it protects to a single counter being a bit too much, for Beast Within, which is just a generically good source of removal to help us deal with almost any type of threat that our opponents can throw our way, and the second being Axing Hindervines, whose on-theme fog effect is a bit too cute for this build, and replacing it with Return of the Wild Speaker, which is a much better fit for us thanks to padding our draw package even further, or alternatively, providing a board-wide pump effect at instant speed to help enable alpha strikes should the opportunity present itself. Then moving on to our sorcery upgrades, we'll predominantly be focusing on refining our core stats in this category, with the mediocre Mana Rock's Fractured Power Stone and Commander Sphere being replaced with Farseek and Rampant Growth to provide cheaper and or more reliable fixing and ramp, and the solid but out of place wheel path of the Pyromancer being traded out for Rishkar's Expertise, which gives us access to yet another powerful piece of card advantage that scales based on our creature's power to help reload our hands, and even gets us a spell into play for free as it does so. Then proceeding to our enchantment upgrades, we'll be focusing our efforts in this category to further improve our counter distribution, with Flame Shadow Conjuring's token creation, Ion Storm's damage, and Together Forever's counter-themed protection being swapped out for Mael's Aria, Rhythm of the Wild, and Felidar Retreat, all of which provide our build with easy-to-enable counter distribution via either controlling big creatures, having creatures ETB, or putting lands into play, in addition to having solid upsides with their life gain and eventual win condition as we stack counters on our creatures, haste enabling to allow our creatures to swing in as soon as they come down to pile on the damage and proc their on attack and damage triggers, or token creation to build up our board if we need the additional board presence. We'll then also be replacing the mediocre wipe Heaven to Earth for the counter distribution empowering Hardened Scales to help supplement our game plan even further on the cheap, and cutting the overcosted Rock Ichor Elixir for the budget Ozolith alternative Resourceful Defense, which helps us retain our hard-earned counters as their holders leave the battlefield, and even provides us with the means to move our counters around to stack them on a singular target for optimal doubling. And lastly, we'll be removing the arguably bad land Temple of the False God and slotting in Colossal Majesty in its place, giving our build yet another easy-to-proc source of draw that almost brings our card advantage sources up to the standard amount. And speaking of which, our lone artifact upgrades will see us exchange out Predagard's Stronghold and its one-use counter distribution for one final piece of draw, namely Lifecrafter's Bestiary, which again fits perfectly into this build as a source of repeatable draw that works off our large creature base, bringing our draw sources up to an even 10 and providing some passive card selection as a bonus to help smooth out our draws in both the early and late game. And at last, reaching our land upgrades, we'll be literally upgrading Field of Ruin to Demolition Field, which is effectively a power-crept version of the same card that doesn't ramp the rest of the table when we use it, while still providing the same non-basic land destruction to help snipe out problematic utility lands, and terraforming Mosswort Bridge into Oran Reef the Vast Wood, which trades the hideaway its predecessor provided for additional counter distribution from our land slot, which this build can get a lot of mileage out of, seeing as our creature base is primarily green. So, now that we've covered all 29 cards that we've upgraded from the core build, let's take a look at the breakdown for this Precon upgrade. This deck currently has 40 creatures including the Commander, 8 instants, 5 sorceries, 7 enchantments, 4 artifacts, 0 planeswalkers, and 36 lands. Looking at the stats that matter to our game plan, we have 45 sources of +1/+1 counters, 28 cards that care about +1/+1 counters, 9 cards that care about creatures' power, and 2 cards that get us extra uses out of our commander's ability, leaving us with a very solid amount of +1/+1 counter generation and support to fuel our primary game plan, a decent Power Matters sub-theme that works well alongside our primary game plan to generate additional value, and a splash of ways to get additional uses out of our commander's ability that, while not required, are nice to have access to while also being able to get value out of our other creatures alongside our commander. For general deck stats, we have 15 ramp sources, 10 card draw sources, 10 targeted removal sources, and 1 board wipe. Our ramp being slightly higher than average since we want to get the counter distribution game plan online as quickly and reliably as possible, while our wipes are slightly lower than average since we're more concerned about establishing and maintaining our boards rather than wiping our opponents. Looking at our mana curve, we have 4 1-drops, 14 2-drops, 21 3-drops, 11 4-drops, 9 5-drops, 4 6-drops, and 1 7-drop, leaving us with a mid-weight curve that aims to drop counter generating and distributing creatures early alongside counter support pieces to get as many counters on our creatures as possible, followed up by our commander to double up on their counters and enabling them to flatten our opponent's life totals with their gigantic stat blocks. The final price of this build then comes out to be $74.89 after upgrades. This price does not include tax or shipping and assumes that the price you paid for the Precon was $40. The price of the cards was calculated by using the cheapest listed marketplace price on TCG Player at the time of this recording. For side grades, if you find yourself not wanting to run Universes Beyond cards but still want to replace the temporary token creation and flicker included in the base build, the Tyranids, Aberrant, Tervagon, and Exocrine can be swapped out for Apocalypse Hydra, Hooded Hydra, and Pelucranos World Eater for about $2 more, and still provide the build with scalable +1/+1 counter-focused creatures that provide removal, token creation, and board wipes. Otherwise, we can substitute Sporeback Troll for Duskshell Crawler if we want to focus more on getting our creatures through for damage rather than keeping them alive. Rishkar's expertise can be traded out for Garruk's Uprising, which can potentially provide more draw over time as well as AoE Trample, but can be less reliable if we don't have ways to get counters on our creatures as they come into play. And if we don't mind running Tyranid-themed cards, Defiler of Vigor can be exchanged out for Bone Sabers if we want to include a source of counters that hits the board faster and stacks counters on singular creatures more effectively faster over the later game that its predecessor provides. Then for further upgrades, we can axe Dromoka's command in favor of Hopeful Initiate, who can weaponize our counter generation by turning it into repeatable backer removal for us. Swap out the legend Hamaz Guardian of Arashin for Ozolith the Shattered Spire as another way to empower our counter distribution that's also capable of distributing counters itself. Cut Pride Malkin for Kodama of the West Tree, who still provides all our counter-laden creatures with trample as well as turns them into repeatable sources of land ramp as they connect. Bench Genesis Hydra for Benevolent Hydra, who further empowers our counter generation and distribution by just existing. Replacing Resourceful Defense with the Ozolith, which is a strictly better version of its predecessor by being cheaper to cast and not costing any mana to move tokens around, and trade out Colossal Majesty for Branching Evolution to double the effectiveness of all our counter distribution and generation for a relatively low mana cost. And finally, much to my annoyance, we can scrap Lifecrafter's Bestiary to make room for my old nemesis that keeps appearing in all my green upgrade recommendations, the Great Henge, which provides ramp, repeatable draw, and repeatable counter distribution for our creature-heavy build, and we can often cast for only 2 thanks to our counter-laden creatures reducing its casting cost, ultimately making it a powerhouse addition that does nearly everything we could want a card to do for us, except apparently get reprinted outside a box topper to help reduce its price. It's been 3 years, Wizards, come on, let's get a real reprint of this thing already. Thanks everyone for sticking around until the end of the video. Firstly, I'd like to take a moment to thank everyone who's participated in the 10k subscriber giveaway so far. As thanks to you, the channel has grown to 10.7k subscribers despite my recent unscheduled time off. So thank you all for your continued support, and let's see how many more subscribers we can get between now and the drawing for the giveaway, which has been moved to April 29th, and see how many more additional upgrades we can unlock for it. Then moving on to the next Precon upgrade. The next Precon upgrade we'll be tackling will be Cavalry Charge and its face commander, Sidar Jabari of Zhalfir. So look forward to this Knight Tribal upgrade coming soon next week. And lastly, before we close out, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't done so already, as this channel can't continue to grow without your support. And if you feel like showing your thanks by keeping me caffeinated while I make these videos, please consider buying me a coffee at the link in the description. And if any of you would like to support the channel in a different way, feel free to check out the other deck techs floating around my head if you'd like to see the latest builds, or click on the link above for a playlist of all the Cut Rate Commander episodes I've made so far. And with that, have a good one folks, and stay safe.